What up, y'all? This is your Don Israel coming to you live from Lit, asking y'all to subscribe to the channel. So make sure y'all subscribed, make sure y'all liking the videos, make sure y'all commenting, and make sure you turn on your notifications that let you know when new videos are dropping. We're dropping them daily, and you want to be on it because we on it, all right? So keep it lit, keep it locked, subscribe, we out. Marduce is a drink. What's going on, y'all? This is your Don Israel, aka Liddy Fontaine. Pretty Liddy is what they call me, and this is another episode of Lit, the premier platform for all things literature, swaggy, and otherwise. Today's guest is a special guest. We got Carina Chocano. Am I saying it right? Chocano. You want to make sure I say it right. Just pulled up. We have her publicist, Kathy, in the back. She's off camera, but she's still swaggy. Her book, You Play the Girl, comes out today. August 8th. Make sure you get that. It's a brilliant essay collection about the ways in which, if I'm going to summarize it, the ways in which women are made to play the supporting roles in their own lives. But today we're going to chop it up with the person who wrote it, Carina, who also came swaggy in his pink jumpsuit. No. Could you stand up for us? We have a swag cam.
Okay.
Talk to us about this outfit.
About the jumpsuit?
Yeah, you came ready to play. So stand back so we can catch the whole outfit. So walk us through the fit.
Well, this is my new jumpsuit.
Okay.
It's Stephen Allen. I got it super on sale, so I was able to purchase it.
We got a camera right there. And the shoes is wonderful.
Oh, thanks. The shoes are Topshop.
Oh.
They were also
really on sale. And the swaggy pink frames.
These are Warby Parker. Am I supposed to be giving brand names, or is that?
You can do it all.
They are actually Amanda de Cadenet designed some special glasses for Warby Parker, and I got a pair.
All right, so you grab a seat. So thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
I know you live in Los Angeles.
Yes.
All right, and I know you have an event. We're going to talk about it more later, but you have an event tomorrow at which will be by the time of this airing probably like older, but Wednesday, tomorrow, August 9th, you're talking to Megan Dom.
That's right.
About the book. So talk to us about how the book started. You Play the Girl.
So, well, I was a film critic for about 4 years at the LA Times.
Okay.
And I think that around the time that I was writing about movies, you know, when you're a film critic, you have to go to a lot of movies, and we went to a lot of screenings. And I think at the time, it was just like kind of a low point for women in film. Like, I think that people think that, you know, it was ever thus, but really, we kind of go through cycles, and I think that was a particular low point, like around 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it was a sort of a combination of, like, just the culmination of seeing, like, one, you know, depressing film after another. And then I happened to read an interview with Isla Fisher in an Australian paper.
Okay.
And she said that, I think someone had asked her about, oh, well, you know, after you were in the Wedding Crashers, you must have had tons of great offers. And she said, you know, there weren't that many because there just aren't that many parts. She said, in Hollywood, all the parts are written for men and you play the girl. And that quote just really stuck with me. And also at the time, people, there was sort of an immediate little mini backlash. Like, everyone kind of excerpted that quote, and it was all over the internet. And the way it was framed, the fact that she had said something was framed as like, oh, look at this crazy girl. What is she talking about? You know, there was a sort of backlashy element to it. And I remember it just really bugged me, and it made me feel kind of terrible because I totally knew what she was talking about. And then almost immediately I could see how unreceptive the world was to anyone even telling the truth about it, even in this kind of mild way that she did. Right.
So, you grew up in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken? Where did you grow up?
I grew up all over the place. My dad was a pharmaceutical executive.
Yes, in the book,
Yeah, and we got transferred around. Plus, my parents are from Lima, Peru. I never lived there except for a very short time as a little kid. We have a fly.
Yeah, no, we have this. This set is Lord of the Flies. This is just something that comes with the territory right now.
It's cool. No, it's. So I lived all over. I lived in Spain. I lived in Chicago. I lived.
Where would you call home? Where do you feel home?
Well, honestly, I moved around so much that there's actually a thing I recently learned called third culture kids, and that's like for people that have that kind of like I spent the longest part of my childhood in Madrid, Spain, but going to an American school, and my parents had a lot of Latin American friends, so it was kind of, and my friends were, my school had kids from like 80 different countries, so it was really a kind of a global.
So that would make sense as to why some sort of you find home in film, because film has that sort of like ubiquitous, in a sense, like the way it posits itself to be in conversation with many cultures at once.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So talk to us, talk to me, talk to everybody about your background in film criticism as a film critic. I know they changed it to movie critic, as you say in the book.
Yeah, they may have changed
to make
it back
it less
since then.
elitist
That's
or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. But how did you get started?
Well, I was actually a comp lit major in college.
Okay.
So which I didn't. I think that at the time I thought was just going to mean that I was going to read a lot of novels, but really was more like criticism and theory, and sort of introduced me to the idea of like seeing films as texts and you know, applying feminist theory or Marxist theory or whatever to films. And so that was my first experience, probably my first experience with criticism was in college. And
okay. And where'd you go for college?
Northwestern.
Oh, Chicago. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so, you know, and also Chicago had a lot of, you know, Northwestern has a big film department, and you could see a lot of great movies in Chicago. And then I spent my junior year in Paris and did a lot of, there was critical studies there. And of course you could see any movie you want at any time of day in Paris. Yeah. Everything's always playing. Like you can go see like Bergman, you know, on a Tuesday afternoon.
That's dope.
Yeah. So I think, and also growing up, you know, when I was a kid in Madrid, when we first moved to Madrid in 1979, I think there were only like 1.5 TV channels. There's like it was like nothing, and so
they didn't want y'all watching TV, I guess.
Well, it was just there were no private TV. There was only state channels at the time, and this was like right after Franco dictatorship, and.
So what year is this we talking?
This is 79.
Okay.
So like by 81 there was 1 million channels, but like for a year or two, you know, there was just like 1.5, and they showed. So like one of the few things on TV was like classic movies, and so they had all these like Hollywood classic movies every Saturday night and every Saturday afternoon. So like I was and some other night of the week. So like 2-3 times a week I was watching like old Howard Hawks movies or John Ford movies or all these old movies that, you know, Billy Wilder movies that I probably wouldn't have gotten to see if we had stayed in the U.S. or something.
Yeah. So you talk about film a lot in this book, but you also talk about writing, and you do a great job of uniting the world of literature. You bring literary language to cinema. And there's like this book immediately reminded me of, I don't know if you read it, you probably have, but it's James Baldwin's The Devil Finds Work.
I have not.
I'm gonna have to get it for you. It's a brilliant book. It's like a 3-chapter book, big essay about, and he basically talks about the ways in which film and cinema taught him about race and power in the culture, and he talks about his white teacher in elementary school who used to take him to the theater. And her name was Billy, and his father did not allow him to go because she was a white woman. But his mother allowed it, and somehow he ended up going to theater, and it was theater that saved him. Right. And so the book is him, like he does readings on Birth of a Nation. The movie with it's a movie with Sidney Poitier, and he's like chained to another guy. It's a black-white, like one of those buddy. Like, you know, one of those racial harmony films. And when I first read it, it was just like, I did not know you could write about film like that. Before I read that book, I thought that film was something you could not write like exquisitely about. Who was the first person, I know you brought her with you in your phone, who was the first person who like taught you that writing could be exquisite? Well,
the segment that I brought, the passage that I brought, is from a Virginia Woolf essay. Yeah. And she's definitely one of my major influences. Yeah. And especially in the way that you're saying, with James Baldwin, like she kind of there was a lot about what she wrote that opened my eyes to the idea that you could write about writing, or the experience of what it felt to write, and to be a woman and try to write, and how being a woman related to writing, and the fact that, and just, you know, it's like you're saying, like just reading about someone who sort of felt the same things that you felt, like in relation to reading other stuff or the culture or whatever, is really, really, I don't know what, it's eye-opening, but also just weirdly like validating, or just reconnects you to yourself and just grounding in some way.
Right.
So I always felt like, you know, you know how you read something like that, and even if it's kind of from another time, it feels so contemporary, or even modern. Like someone's looking in your window. Yeah, or even like ahead of its time, and it's like, oh, this is from a really long time ago. Yeah. Well, you know, I always felt that she had that quality. So you want to read that? Read that part. Throw them swaggy glasses. I'm gonna throw on my glasses. This was So this is from. It was originally, I think, a speech that she was asked to give. Okay. At one of the first women's colleges. Okay. And then it was adapted as an essay. And she basically, she was asked to give a talk at this women's college about professions for women. Okay. I'm trying to think of what year this was, and I don't know offhand. Maybe it's like 1930 something. Okay, we'll Google it after. We can Google it after. And so she's asked to give a speech about what professions might be good for women to go into, and she tells a story about how she wrote her first, I think it was a book review, and was so excited it was published, and then she got paid, and she went out and bought a cat with the money. And she was like, this is great. Like this, what could be easier? I'm buying all the cats now. Yeah. So she says, but to tell you my story, it is a simple one. You have only got to figure yourselves a girl in a bedroom with a pen in her hand. She had only to move the pen from left to right, from 10 o'clock to 1. Then it occurred to her to do what is simple and cheap enough, after all, to slip a few of those pages into an envelope, fix a penny stamp in the corner, and drop the envelope into a red box at the corner. It was thus that I became a journalist, and my effort was rewarded on the first day of the following month, a very glorious day it was for me, by a letter from an editor containing a cheque for £1, 10 shillings and 6 pence. But to show you how little I deserve to be called a professional woman, how little I know of the struggles and difficulties of such lives, I have to admit that instead of spending that sum upon bread and butter, rent, shoes and stockings, or butcher's bills, I went out and bought a cat. A beautiful cat, a Persian cat, which very soon involved me in a bitter disputes with my neighbors. What could be easier than to write articles and to buy Persian cats with the profits? But wait a minute. Articles have to be about something. Mine, I seem to remember, was about a novel by a famous man. And while I was writing this review, I discovered that if I were going to review books, I should need to do battle with a certain phantom. And the phantom was a woman. And when I came to know her better, I called her after the heroine of a famous poem, The Angel in the House. It was she who used to come between me and my paper when I was writing reviews. It was she who bothered me and wasted my time and so tormented me that at last I killed her. You who come of a younger and happier generation may not have heard of her. You may not know what I mean by the angel in the house. I will describe her as shortly as I can. She was intensely sympathetic. Someone just tweeted at me. The book dropped. It's hot. Everybody wants to talk to you. She was intensely sympathetic. She was immensely charming. She was utterly unselfish. She excelled in the difficult arts of family life. She sacrificed herself daily. If there was chicken, she took the leg. If there was a draft, she sat in it. In short, she was so constituted that she never had a mind or a wish of her own, but preferred to sympathize always with the minds and wishes of others. Above all, I need not say it, she was pure. Her purity was supposed to be her chief beauty. Another one, sorry. It's okay. Her purity was supposed to be her chief beauty, her blushes, her great grace. In those days, the last of Queen Victoria, every house had its angel. And when I came to write, I encountered her with the very first words. The shadow of her wings fell upon my page. I heard the rustling of her skirts in the room. Directly, that is to say, I took my pen in hand to review that novel by a famous man. She slipped behind me and whispered, "My dear, you are a young woman. You are writing about a book that has been written by a man. Be sympathetic, be tender, flatter, deceive, use all the arts and wiles of our sex. Never let anybody guess that you have a mind of your own. Above all, be pure." And she made as if to guide my pen. I now record the one act for which I take some credit to myself, though the credit rightly belongs to some excellent ancestors of mine who left me a certain sum of money. Shall we say £500 a year? So that it was not necessary for me to depend solely on charm for my living. I turned upon her and caught her by the throat. I did my best to kill her. My excuse, if I were to be had up in a court of law, would...
The tweets. There's too many tweets. You're too popular.
Today's
the day. Today's the day.
Would be that I acted in self-defense. Had I not killed her, she would have killed me. She would have plucked the heart out of my writing. For as I found directly, I put pen to paper. You cannot review even a novel without having a mind of your own, without expressing what you think to be the truth about human relations, morality, sex. And all these questions, according to the angel of the house, cannot be dealt with freely and openly by women. They must charm, they must conciliate, they must, to put it bluntly, tell lies if they are to succeed. Thus, whenever I felt the shadow of her wing or the radiance of her halo upon my page, I took up the ink pot and flung it at her. She died hard. Her fictitious nature was of great assistance to her. It is far harder to kill a phantom than a reality. She was always creeping back when I thought I had dispatched her. Though I flatter myself that I killed her in the end, the struggle was severe. I took much time that had better have been spent upon learning Greek grammar or roaming the world in search of adventures. But it was a real experience. It was an experience that bound to befall all women writers at that time. Killing the angel in the house was part of the occupation of a woman writer.
Yeah. That was long, but it was worth it.
It was very long.
The reason why I say it's worth it. No, I mean, it's nothing to apologize for because I feel, and even that, right? Like, in the book you talk about the Amy Schumer sketch that she does for her show, where like there's a panel of women and they're constantly apologizing.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And there's that thing of not wanting to ever take up too much space, whether it be with your thoughts or with your body or with these other things. But what I love about this book is that it lets it all hang out. The intellectualism goes everywhere. It goes from Alice in Wonderland, A Pretty Woman. What would I say? The intellectual territory is vast, and you have no problem claiming it. Was that something easy for you to do? How hard was it for you to kill the angel?
Well, I identify with this because I think it was really hard.
Okay.
I think it took a long time. I think that's probably, I really identified with that as a sort of a long battle.
Yeah.
And yeah, it took forever, and it took until, I don't know. I mean, I guess until I was really publishing and.
So when does writing become a serious? So back up. When does Virginia Woolf enter your sort of literary writer's life?
Oh, well, that probably in college. I mean, long before I was actually writing for a living, yeah.
And when does that become your way of assessing the world and sort of grappling with?
I was always a big reader, as a kid. I just read constantly, and I think, like you said about movies, when you're moving around, that you're trying to find a certain, you're trying to find a home or consistency. Well, books were that also.
Yeah.
Probably even more.
Okay.
So I was always a reader. I think I had an idea as a little kid that I didn't want to grow up to be a writer. Like, I had the sense, like, don't do that, whatever you do. I don't know why. I do remember.
I enjoy this from the start.
Yeah, exactly. Like, whatever you do not get this stupid idea in your head.
So when did the stupid idea in your head become like, you know what, I'm gonna go with this?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think I tried. I remember being maybe about 12, 13, 14, and I wrote a story and tried to entered a 17 fiction contest.
Okay.
Did not win.
Okay.
And then in college, I think I was interested in like joining. There was a creative writing program that you could apply to as a sophomore to just do your junior and senior year. But I don't remember if I applied or not. I wanted to go to France, so I did that instead. So, which was of no use to, but it was fun.
Life it's many detours to lead to a main destination. So
and then after college, I guess I had the idea, I wanted to make films for a while.
Okay.
And, but I wanted to like write and direct films. And so I think I just, it slowly started to edge into it.
Okay.
And I think that at one point I worked at a video game company.
Really?
Yeah. Early days.
Dope.
They don't exist. It doesn't exist anymore.
The video game company.
The video game company.
Okay.
Yeah. And they used to write these scripts, and so I got them to let me write one.
Okay.
And then after that, I went freelance, and I was writing for a lot of like early video games, like all these games on CD-ROMs and stuff.
Yeah.
I wrote some scripts.
So that seems like a place where you would kind of learn that the roles for women in video games sort of mirror the roles that women play.
It's true,
in movies,
they were ridiculous.
Because they're really flattened. Like the girl is, like you say in the book, the girl is the one to be won. The girl does not win.
Yeah.
Right? She's a part of helping the main character, the male, recognize himself. She is not in her own. She's not going through her own process of recognition.
Well, it's true. Although these games, it was a very strange company, and they had they were shot on film.
Yeah.
And it's just not.
Yeah,
turns out it doesn't really.
Yeah, it wasn't.
But who knew that in 1994 or whatever it was? And they had a lot of the stars were actresses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but they were, but yes, they were sort of like kick-ass, women in like kick-ass roles. Okay. But they were like, They
had to be sexy.
They had to be sexy. It was like the girl from Baywatch.
Yeah. So, a thing that, and we could talk, I want to hear your point from this, but it seems that one of the vehicles and the catalyst for you, I think, coming into this sense of like this girl role comes from the interaction you have with your daughter Kira. Mm-hmm. And the book actually opens with you reading her like princess stories and her sort of rejecting Alice in Wonderland first.
Yeah.
And so what is that the actual way in which like you started to realize that there's this limited girl role?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, so Alice in Wonderland, I don't know what made me buy it. I saw this like nice copy of it and I bought it and I took it home and I started reading it to her and she was like, "Get that thing away from me." And I remembered that as a kid I had a rejecting feeling toward Alice too. Yeah. And then I mentioned it to my mom and she said, "Oh yeah, I never liked Alice either." And then I ended up reading it on my own because what Kira really loved was Sleeping Beauty and
she was pretty.
Because she was pretty, and she ranked them by pretty, and Sleeping Beauty was the prettiest. And that's because her hair was long and blonde and loose. Like, that's the defining, category. And I read Alice in Wonderland on my own, and there were so many things about it. But one is that she's just, like, she's very contentious. She's moody. She's, like, gets mad at everybody. She, like, expresses her needs. Like, she does all this stuff. She eats stuff. She drinks stuff. She, like, takes stuff.
Takes space.
And she argues, and she's got all these things that, like, and everybody is constantly telling her, "Oh, you're so disagreeable," or "You're crazy," or you're too big, you're too small. Like at one point she's with the Mad Hatter, she sits at the table and they're like, "There's no room for you here," and it's like an empty table. Or they say, "Do you want some wine?" And she says, "Okay," and they say, "There's no wine." Like they're just like
fucking with her
the whole time. Everyone's fucking with her. So she's like, "What is wrong? What's going on here?" And I really identified with that feeling in particular, like sort of in general in the culture, but in particular having spent all this time as a critic and sort of going into this rabbit hole of like watching movie after movie after movie and spending all these hours
Yeah.
in the dark, like watching this stuff that had a very similar effect. Like, I'm like, if that's supposed to reflect my experience or my point of view, I don't recognize it. It all
Right.
seems crazy to me.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel like I don't exist, or like the world doesn't get me, or whatever.
Sorry.
No,
Finish
so
it.
that was just that was a really inspiring moment.
Yeah. So the thing that I loved also about the book, because I had a mother who literally did what your book does.
How?
Which was when we would watch movies. My mother, she was sort of a dictator who was allowed to watch, and a lot of it came down to her reading into Disney movies. She didn't like the fact that the mothers were always getting killed. She didn't like, overtly, she was a black mother, so a lot of these films couldn't even make it past the, where's the black characters?
Uh-huh.
No. So what she was teaching me how to do at a very young age was she was teaching me how to read.
Yeah.
Meaning decipher, decode. What's this film really saying?
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I would say that a lot of the enjoyment and entertainment parts of media was stripped from my watching of it, and I was immediately sort of entrusted with this ability to reflect and think about it critically.
Yeah.
And so, one of the reasons why I find your book very rewarding is because it reminded me, and it speaks to the upbringing I was allowed, I was brought into, which is why I was not the person you would take to the movies, because I would leave and they'd be like, man, that scene was so dope, and I would be like, but really though, he jumps out and he gets shot at 20 times, no one shoots him once. They're like, stop talking! That's not what the point of the movie is. Stop! And I was always that kid who would bring some sense of logic to these illogical narratives.
Yeah.
And I would bring critiques to them that when you really thought about it, it was just running the whole movie mood. And so when I'm reading the book, I'm like, this is someone who thinks like me, meaning someone who thinks about what we often think about is this is more than just film. These are messages that's being sent to us. That's also ultimately trying to tell us where we belong in the world. You talk about Pretty Women, and we talked about it off camera, but I remember not watching Pretty Women until probably 2 years ago. And one of my first reserves, I ain't gonna like this movie because it's a white movie about this girl who's a prostitute. You ain't gonna make me like this movie. And I was watching, I'm like, oh, I don't know why, but a lot of it was I wasn't expecting to like it, and then I begrudgingly liked it. And then there was what I did end up finding valuable about it was the ways in which it had a commentary, which I don't think was necessarily intentional on behalf of the writers, but this commentary about power and how it worked. And I thought that there was a mirroring in a relationship between Julia Roberts' character and Richard Gere's character. I thought in a sense he was sort of his own prostitute for in his own ways of how she talks about she wants the fairy tale, all these things she wants, and he talks about basically he's not going to make himself available in this specific way. So money he can give away easily because that's not something that he really. But you can get the money, but you're not going to get him. Yeah. I
think that you kind of took that route to get to Pretty Woman. It's sort of interesting because for me, a lot of this reading movies or watching them, one of the things that we're never really taught to do is to ask who's making this and why and what's the purpose of it, because there is a purpose. People are really, I'm always shocked now that I think people are really they very easily will just say oh well, this is just like this, and men are like this or women are like that, or this is just natural, and it's this is not a rock formation. This is culture is made by people, and it's made by men mostly, and it's made it has a lot of socializing power and intent. I mean, fairy tales like Hans Christian Andersen, it's moral instruction, and it's sort of social instruction. So Walt Disney movies specifically are socializing agents, like it or not. I mean, it's just the way it is.
But all these movies are, right? I think about and when I was younger as a teenager, I loved Will Ferrell movies, Semi-Pros to Talladega Nights to Anchorman. And as I've gotten older, and I think especially around the time this Trump presidency, I started to really like I enjoy these movies, but not the same. Like I watch them now, and there's something insidious about like even them and like Steve, like the Office, like this, like the sort of incompetent white man who has a lot of power, and because he like fucks up, but he doesn't mean to fuck up. It's like, oh, it's okay. He doesn't mean it. Yeah. And it's like those same things I took at 14, 15 and thought were like cool. It's like I don't find them as funny anymore.
I mean, it's not funny, right? Like, because then you see like, well, there's real world repercussions.
Like who pays for that?
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Someone else is paying for that. And it's like, right, exactly. Like they're getting off the hook. Like, I don't know, the Stanford rapist. Like, well, I see myself in him, and he didn't mean to. Like, well, yeah, he did.
And that's exactly what happened. Was it's like when art starts to imitate life in a way that you can't deny it. Yeah. And when you start to see it mirroring, like to the point where like literally like Donald Trump is a character. Yeah. But it's like that's what makes it scary is that he's a character, but he's a real person who has real power. And so when I watch those same movies I used to enjoy, like I'm like, damn, I can't even enjoy these films. How many people have you ruined film for? Well,
probably a lot.
In your personal circle, like.
But you know, I like to say like I think
I'm not picking on you.
No, it's cool, it's fine. I mean, I think that like maybe I have, you know, definitely some people will used to write to me when I was a film critic and be like, it's just a movie, you know. People will just say, I love like their favorite thing to say is relax. It's like, so I'm very, you know, agitated about it. And really I think that I think it's interesting to break these things down, you know, like I don't think I get bored watching the same story over and over again. And when it's really like you're saying, like the story of the white man who gets away with it, or he's an lovable incompetent or whatever, it just gets so old. It's like you know, if you don't really identify with that character, you're like, oh, okay, you know, like a lot of us aren't enjoying that. I mean, there's a kind of presumption that everyone enjoys it equally, but I don't think it's true, because it's like you say, we can't help watching it and going, well, someone else is paying for this somehow.
And I think, you know, and I'm going to keep bringing Baldwin is one of my favorite writers, but there's a speech he gave, I think at Cambridge, it was a debate he had with William Buckley, and he talked about, like, you watch these films with the Native Americans and cowboys, and you're taught to like identify with John Wayne, not realizing that you're really in his words the Indian. And I think with these films too, one of the interesting things, and I know you didn't necessarily do it too much, was like an intersectional reading of like gender and race and politics and all these things. But one of the things I did see was that I can speak for in like a lot of race politics and race power is gendered, meaning like as a black man, for example, I understand I'm a man and I wield a certain power as a man, but the black part of myself renders me in like a larger context of power as a sort of woman. In terms of like white men. So there's always this, like even in film, like
this is the power relation that you were talking about before with what's his face, Richard Gere. And I think I actually came to that conclusion in the chapter where I write about Mad Men, that like Don Draper's a girl. Because he didn't have power. He was just looks and his charm.
He was very aware of how he got into
his
the position.
Image, and he was able, and then he was able to sort of step into that role because he could impersonate a white man in terms of like he'd impersonate someone like Roger, who was born rich and powerful. You know, his partner. Whereas he was able to step into that. Whereas like Peggy and Joan couldn't just step into that, and were stuck in the sex pot, the wife, the clever single girl. But like you know, that's why it's like the girl thing. You know, it's gendered in terms of its power and in terms of like. Well, that's why I was saying kind of like. You have to think about what these stories, how they function, and ultimately they function to sort of reinforce the power structure, and that's it.
And that's what I said. That's why I think I know I communicated with so much, because it was like, you know, when you're amongst your friends, your guy friends, and you're a guy, everything is about not being a woman. It's like, oh, you're being a bitch, blah, blah, blah. So they're like, when you really start to understand what's really happening, it's less about like what, you know, you're afraid of and what people want you to be afraid of and what they don't want you to identify with.
Mm-hmm.
So part of also playing the girl is also playing someone, as you say in the book, someone who can't be recognized. This is not a person. This is this is an idea.
Right.
And like there's a violence that inherently happens when we turn people into ideas, and there's a second violence that happens when we allow ourselves to not investigate why that idea exists.
Yeah, I mean that actually is almost a quote, I think, from an interview with Zoe Kazan, who wrote and starred in the movie Ruby Sparks.
What movie is the
Do you know this movie Ruby Sparks?
You're a film.
This movie Ruby Sparks that was about like a Wonder Boy writer played by Paul Dano. Okay, and he's writing he's stuck on his novel, his second novel. Okay. And he dreams up his like dream girl, and then she kind of appears in his house one day. And so, but it ends up being, because he can actually control her with his writing. I mean, it's very literally about this. Mm-hmm. He starts to like mess with her, like, oh, she's being too this, she's being too that, and it starts to affect her, like how she feels. Mm-hmm. And it starts like she starts to get depressed, so then he like tweaks her, and she starts to get too independent, then she gets too dependent, then but it's all about like how the stories control, how much they can like shape how we feel. And
that reminds me of another movie, Stranger Than Fiction.
Oh yeah,
another Will Ferrell movie, which is great. But it was like showing the responsibility that writers have when you put something out into the world. It has a tangible effect on the way the world operates. Yeah, which is like often like that sort of delusional thinking of, it's just a movie, meaning that this has no repercussions.
Yeah. Oh, and that's why it reminded me when you said what was it? What you just said, the violence of reducing a person to an idea. She says at one point they, the relationship breaks down, and he starts to just sort of cruelly manipulate her and like make her do stuff, like get down on all fours and do this and that until she escapes. Yeah. And so in an interview later, she said the movie's about the violence of reducing a person to an idea. Yeah. Because he can't handle her as an independent. Yeah. Or as something separate from him, like as a human being that's not relative to him and isn't just part of him. Yeah.
Your poise, by the way, of managing to not swat these flowers is amazing. I have to commend you on that.
I'm sort of trying with the gesture.
It's like Tai Chi, which you was watching the whole time. I was like, you were good. Another chapter I really loved was the Playboy chapter. Uh-huh. And you had that quote in there where you said that at first you thought Playboy had no boys. What you realized was Playboy had no boys. It was like, there ain't no girls in this. Yeah. And it was a me thing. I had a friend on here who was talking about porn. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed in porn, like is that a man is always wearing clothes. Yeah. A man is always dressed. He's always protected in a way that the woman is like, she's fully on camera. She's naked. She's in a place of vulnerability in a way that a man is not. And I think about that in the terms of like what you said about the Playboy bunnies, is that it's not a matter of even diversity, is variety. It's a variation of the same thing. Yeah, yeah. When you were young and you're navigating this space, and as a young lady, and also like Latina, right? What was the power structure like in your own family in terms of like your parents, and how you like negotiated coming into this sort of consciousness? Because it seems that you were, is this like a retrospect of you thinking back on it, or was this something that you were always, this way of thinking?
I mean, it's interesting because there's so many layers to it, right? Like I talk about, the Playboys belonged to my grandfather. Yeah. And he was a colonel in the Air Force in Peru, and he was sort of a military man.
That's you got to have your Playboys.
He was also very Catholic, like, but just like super, every patriarchal thing, right? Yeah. He was hilarious, and he was a great grandfather and stuff, but he was, the boss, right? And he was the boss of everybody. And so there are a lot of things that factor into it. Like it was also, I mean, my mom grew up like in the 50s, and so it was very much like 50s traditional structures. He just didn't think, he thought that he really didn't have to send his daughters to college because he had sons to send through college, stuff like that. But my parents, were from another generation where obviously they were more less like that, you know? So, I guess it's one of I think I write about it at some point, like where they
like you talk about your mother having a certain sense of like freedom.
Yeah, it's like they're a traditional. This is the thing. We always talk about things like belonging to the past or to different cultures. Yeah. But the thing is that it's still this way. Mm-hmm. It's just not any different, I think, in any culture or at any time. For the most part, you have, or at least like, I think that I come from, like I was saying, my dad was a pharmaceutical executive, and there's a certain sort of, I think no matter where in the world you live or where you come from, there is a kind of like middle class uniformity in terms of values and things like that comes from, that is kind of the same from one place to another. Yeah. And if anything, I would say I identify with that kind of super bougie thing. Like that's what I grew up in. And it doesn't matter really what country or what language or what religion, because they're all kind of the same. And that's like when I went to this school, it was like that, just from a million countries. And so in that sense, we were like, I don't remember how I describe it, but it's like, modern traditional or whatever, but it's still traditional. Like my dad had the job, the career rather. My mom was, housewife, homemaker, stay-at-home mom. Like the terms always change. The word always changed.
But it was essentially the same. It's
always the same power dynamic. Yeah. She was completely, obviously, it was quote unquote equal. She had the last word. She blah blah blah. But but in the end, like it was contingent on the job. The boss was my dad's job, and so whether or not we wanted to move, we moved a lot, like from one city to another and one country to another, and that was hard, but we didn't have a say in that, you know. And I think that like the funny thing is that might have been a somewhat unusual way to grow up, although lots of people grow up that way, but it kind of keeps coming back to the whole, this is a capitalist power structure, right? And I think that in my experience, it just really laid it bare, because it's like we depend on this global company, this multinational company, and our fate is in their hands. Right. And my mother is like there to support my father's career and to make it possible for him to have a family that she like packs up, moves, unpacks, and then does it again and again and again. And she wasn't able to like say, oh well, I'm gonna get a job here in this place where we live now, and now that's gonna take precedence. Like it was always. So I guess I would say that there was never any question that I was gonna go to college and do whatever, but there was sort of a little beyond that. It started to get foggier. Like, well, then what happens though? Yeah, like no one really thought about like how does this really make you capable of navigating this power structure. Yeah, or what happens next, like you go to college, okay, you work for a while, and then what? What if you get married? What if you have a kid? Then what? Yeah. Then what kind of a power structure are you in? It seems like that sort of resistance of the happily ever after narrative. Yeah. That like you don't think about, and then they lived happily ever after. Like, but what happens after that? Yeah. We're not thinking about like you go to college, because that for a lot of people, especially my mother, she finished 2 years. My father didn't. I don't even think he graduated high school. He went to the Marines. And so for like in my immediate family, if you went to college, that was the accomplishment. No one thought about after. Right. It was like, oh, you went to college, like that's a happily ever after. But now it's like, okay, the day after happily ever after. Now what do we do? Especially if you're a woman, right? Because if you're a man, like okay, then you get a job or whatever. I mean, if you're a certain man, because if like you're a black man, or if you're like a man that's not white, and I think that's one of the things that I think is also the book highlights is like this sort of ways in which like being a white man gives you access to so much, and that's what I'm saying. Like there's ways in which being a man gives me access, but then being a black man, there's that gendered thing of like which is why they. Not they, but like culture often reports on the hypermasculinity of men of color, because there's this necessity, quote unquote, to what's the word, like effeminate why like there's so many black actors who've been made to wear dresses, right? That's like a big trope in Dave Chappelle. Like, I don't want to wear a dress and all these things, but I say that to say basically like what happens when like these roles that we play, you don't really have an end to them. Right, the role is just supposed to satisfy this larger narrative,
but the role itself, which is what I think the girl is about, is like we're not thinking about how this role plays into the bigger picture. We're just thinking about the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
Like you say, any movie, not what you said, but you quoted, I think, a director who said, like, any movie that has a budget of $100 million, you gotta save the world at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, any sort of the side narratives of, like, the person of color who plays the sidekick or the girl, like, we're not talking about those roles. This is larger than any one thing. This is about the world. Thus, these other narratives don't really, quote unquote, matter as much.
They don't matter. They don't represent humanity.
Yeah,
and I mean, one thing you were just saying about, now I forgot what it was, but it was like going off of what you were just saying about right before the happily ever after is that the interesting thing about that is that for the girl narrative, that ends extremely young.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes, it does.
So, like, if you're, like, the princess who's getting married, what are you, 25 at the most? At the most. Absolute most?
Sometimes younger.
Usually way younger.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know why, I just thought about Mad Men, but there was an episode where someone posts a picture of her driver's license on the bulletin board, and all the girls are laughing at her because she's almost 30. I don't know if you remember that episode, but she, like, takes it down.
I just got into Mad Men. I'm like 3 episodes. I really started watching it because of the book.
Oh, wow.
So you're changing the world out here.
It's great.
Change me, at least. I'm not the world. I can't speak for everybody. But.
Well, yes, you are, because we all contain our own universe. But yeah, so like that idea of like, oh, you're just like, you have an expiration date and it's 30. And I think that even the idea of 30, even for like someone my age, I think I grew up thinking 30 felt like you had to get married before you were 30. You had to have a kid before you were 30. And 30 is really young. And that wasn't even really the age that most people were saying, it was more like 22, 23. My mom got married, I think, at 21 and had me at 23 or something like that. So you think like, well, when is your life actually going to take place? When do you go from being this person that's becoming a person to then just being a person in the world who's like free to do whatever they want, who does, isn't being controlled by parents or who has whatever, some money maybe to spend on their own that they made, or any of these things, like any agency or any power. There's no space in any narratives for women to really live that part, like the adventure of your life.
And you talk about it like a lot of times a woman's end is marked as her beginning. Yeah. The
happy ending. I mean, just the idea that it's an ending
is a testament of the fact that we don't really want to like allow women to live their lives. I want to have you read the part of the introduction. You see I got it all lined up here.
Oh, yeah.
But just start. So y'all in for a treat. Carina's going to read some of the opening of her beautiful book. You Play the Girl.
So this actually relates to the Virginia Woolf piece that I read a little bit. So starting here, right?
Yeah, wait, hold on.
What?
I didn't do this. We got to do this first.
What?
Before we do the reading, gotta have you have some of this drink.
Oh, okay.
We gotta, because I gotta.
Right.
It's.
Is it already?
It's culture. It's popped. We gotta make sure it's fresh for you.
Thank you.
So what you're gonna do? You're gonna drink to the leaf.
Okay.
Cool. All right. And then we give you a little bit. So this is like, the literary, the lit show's version of a gin and juice. I think every great show needs its own mix. I'm gonna tag you up though, because we don't want no problems. So you know that it's Marduce. There's a word for this. It's a portmanteau or portmanteau.
Mm-hmm. Portmanteau.
Yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm. It's a mix. We had a friend telling me about that word. So it's Marduce. And thank you for being on the show.
Cheers.
And congratulations.
Thank
Happy
you.
Pub Day.
Thank you.
Tell me how that tastes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So now we can get into the reading.
All right, now I can really read this. Okay. The True Woman, also called The Angel in the House, after a popular poem by Coventry Patmore, was an idea of a woman endlessly promoted in advertising, newspapers, popular literature, and women's magazines. Oh, this is talking about the 19th century. This was the popular ideal every proper modern lady was expected to live up to. The historian Barbara Welter narrowed the true woman's cardinal virtues to 4. She was pious, submissive, domestic, and pure. Her innocence was childlike, and her demeanor was modest and demure. She forgave her husband all his transgressions, but committed none of her own. She absolved him of his sins. She aimed to please. Her manners were faultless, and her taste was unimpeachable. She was placed like a fragile doll atop a narrow pedestal from which, with one false move, she could fall from a very great height. This was the world a girl like Alice was brought up to navigate. This was her pathway to successful adulthood. She was expected to marry, have children, and become a lady of the house, and she was educated for this purpose alone. A lady of the house became part of the house. Under both British and American law, marriage divested her entirely of her property and personhood. A single woman was a femme sole. I don't know how it's Latin. I don't know. A married woman was a femme couverte, or covered woman, legally subsumed by the identity of her husband. Women began to acquire legal status as people with the Married Women's Property Acts of 1839, but they did not yet fully enjoy it in Alice's day. That's Alice of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, yeah.
In Peru, my own great-grandmother, Rosa Maria Montenegro, was married off when she was 16 to a prosperous man 20 years her senior. I still played with dolls, she told me once. On my wedding night, I tried to climb out the window. Nobody had told me anything. Once she figured it out, she was happier. Her husband was nice to her and gave her more money and freedom than her mother had. Twice a year, she ordered clothes and furniture from Europe. They would arrive by ship and be transported from the end of the dock to the harbor by train. Everyone knew her husband had syphilis. He died when she was very young, leaving her widowed with 3 girls. They moved back in with her mother. Eventually she married again and had a 4th daughter 6 months before her 2nd daughter, my grandmother, had my mom. To remain a spinster was to be societally redundant, but to marry for a girl was to be absorbed into the self of another, like a vanishing twin. A woman's education was designed to coax her to sleep at 16 and keep her unchanged and unconscious forever. It was an undoing. It wasn't a start, but a finishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, so this is, when I read this, I was just like, yeah, this if this is the introduction, because I felt like I was in chapter 3 at this point, and I'm like, this is the introduction? Oh shit, this is going to be good. You really, and I just want to keep just what I really loved about this, which is to me the thesis.
Oh yeah.
Anybody, and if you want me to, you want to read it.
You go ahead.
You can do it for y'all. See, I want to play this role.
Okay.
I wanna do this. The girl was the adult version of the princess. As a kid, I believed the princess was the protagonist because she seemed the most central to the story. The word protagonist comes from the Greek for the leading actor in a contest or cause, and a protagonist is a person who wants something and does something to get it. The girl doesn't act, though. She behaves. She has no cause, but a plight. She doesn't want anything. She is wanted. She isn't a winner. She's won. She doesn't self-actualize, but aids the hero in self-actualization. Sometimes I'd sit in the theater and feel mounting despair and think, why do you keep telling me this? Why are you talking to me this way? And I was just like, you really brought something special with this book.
Thank you.
Where can people find this book?
And wherever books are sold.
Wherever books are sold. That's the easiest thing. What was the conversation about this book? How did this book come about? Like, was this a book that somebody came to you with? Was this a book? Was this a book that you came to publish it?
No, this was an idea I had, like I mentioned before, with when I read that Isla Fisher quote, it stayed with me, and then and actually just around the time when I was writing, reviews for the LA Times, I ended up writing a piece one day about how all these great actresses were cast in these kind of thankless roles where they weren't really allowed to even be funny or have a personality or have a desires of their own. And I wrote this piece. I think I equated it to the equivalent of the government paying farms not to grow corn. Because it was like, why did you cast
paying
this?
You not to play the game.
Yeah, playing you not to be funny in a comedy.
Yeah.
And it was like, why are they casting these amazingly funny people, these talented people in these thankless, narrow depressing roles, and it had, you know, I wrote it, and a lot of people responded, and a lot of people wrote me, and, you know, and I just, it was everyone from, like, I got lots of emails from, and it was all really positive, like from men who said, like, yeah, I don't understand why this is the way it is, from young girls, you know, who were like, oh, you articulated something that I always felt, from women in the industry who were really frustrated about not being able to tell the stories they wanted to tell and being told, like, no one wants to see that, from actors. I mean, it was really an across the board thing. It was really overwhelmingly positive, and it just made me feel like people, you know, I know I'm not the only person who feels this way, you know?
And I think that that's what film, like, good criticism always does, is it opens the world up for the second writing of art, which is the reading of it. And I think that this book is a like a tremendous reading of film. Where can people follow you?
On Twitter, at Carina_Chocano.
And then Instagram is the same.
Instagram is the same.
Any events coming up? I know you have the event tomorrow, which will be past tense by this time. But
and if you're in LA, Skylight Books on August 31st.
Okay. Anything else?
I'll be at Litquake in San Francisco in September. I'll be at Las Vegas Valley Book Festival.
All right.
I'll be at
Kathy, you got
Texas.
I hear you in the back. She's like, please.
Texas, where else?
She's like, say it.
Texas Book Festival in November.
We practice. This is why we practice. This is why.
I told you to memorize it.
But updates. If people want to find updates for anything.
Well, I also have a website, and I'm keeping CarinaChocano.com, and I have an events page there.
Okay. This is making Kathy happy. We got to make it.
Yeah. Am I forgetting anything, Kathy?
That's good.
All right. Okay. So before you get out of here, we want to bless you with this lit pen.
Thank you
for being lit. Coming on the show and talking with us. Yes, that's yours forever.
Awesome.
So, as you heard, everybody, You Play the Girl is in stores as of today. By the time you see this, it will be in the stores probably about a week now. So if you ain't get it, you fucking up. Follow us at Lit Platform. You can follow me at Yadon. Before we still working these things out. So before we get out of here again, I got to get your literary swag. And the literary swag is your favorite three writers and your favorite three clothing designers.
All right. Favorite three writers is hard. I'm not a favorites kind of person.
You're right, so then give me three. So give me like...
I would say, like, obviously Virginia Woolf is someone that I always really spoke to.
We got one.
Okay. Nabokov I always was a humongous fan of.
Okay.
First time I read Lolita, I didn't leave my room until it was done. I mean, there are so many.
Give me somebody recent.
Somebody recent.
In the recent frame that you respect.
I'm putting me on the spot. Let me think. There's so many great people.
You want to go dead then? Just go pick a dead. Pick a dead person.
A dead person. No,
this way you don't got to beef with nobody.
Well, I love my friend Megan Daum, who's
there you go. Boom. There you go.
Who's talking to me tomorrow.
All right.
She's an amazing writer. And then designers, it's no one that I can afford, but maybe some.
It's aspirational. The swag is
aspirational. Rachel Comey.
Okay.
Isabel Marant.
Oh.
Ula Johnson.
Oh, you were just fancy. You were just fancy.
In my mind.
All them films. You've been watching them films.
Yeah.
This is just Sarah Jessica Parker swag up here. All right. So yes, this has been another episode of Lit. I am your host once again, Yadon Israel. We are here with Carina Chocano. Correct? Chocano. We are here with Carina Chocano. You can follow us once again at Lit Platform, at Yadon. Shout outs to the team, Pink Pig Production. Shout out to Cyril Jules. We are out. It's lit.